Alrighty, let's go ahead and, yep, there's Mike. I think Robert is not going to be with us today, so everyone's here who will be here. If I could ask everyone to look at your cell phones and mute them before we start our meeting. Turn on your microphones if you will. We'll see if everyone can get a microphone on. Don's got his on. You might have to share, Laura, that, or I can have Gene shut his off and we can share mine.
I'll share.
Yes.
You good?
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay.
I won't say much.
Well, time being 4 o'clock, I'll call the meeting to order. Gary, would you please give us a roll call?
Healy,
Here.
Heine,
Here.
Kettering,
Here.
Los,
Here.
Nelson,
Here.
Welsh,
Here.
Catholic,
Here.
Burns, Hornstra.
Here.
All right, we do have a quorum present. Item 3, does any member have a reason to abstain for a financial or a non-financial conflict?
I do not.
Loest, no.
Kettering, no.
Hornstra, no.
Heine, no.
Healy, no.
Nelson, no. Catholic, no.
Welsh, no.
All right, next item, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes? Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Agenda is approved. Next, we move to the March 14th minutes. Were there any changes? Entertain a motion to approve.
I'll approve. I'll move.
Thank you, Don. A second, please.
I'll second.
And I have a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. The minutes have been approved. At this time, I will open it up for public comments, and again, we ask that you keep them to about 3 minutes. We're gonna be discussing decommissioning today, and that will be a long topic, so we want as much time as we can. Any public discussion? Go ahead and please state your name when you come to the microphone, if you would.
Is it on?
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Guy Larson, current resident of rural Yankton County, soon to be resident of city of Yankton, representing myself and the Sierra Club. And I'm sorry that I haven't been able to sit in on any of the meetings prior and make my comments, but I was otherwise occupied in Pier. I would just like to go on the record as stating that the Sierra Club is very supportive of wind energy and wind farms as long as they are properly cited and properly regulated, which is what you're in the process of doing now, is making sure that you have all your P's and Q's in order. Environmentally, they are about as clean as it gets. And I would like to, take an opportunity. You may have heard all of this before, but I'd like to just touch on some of the information that you hear that may or may not have any backing. One of the concerns, as you will talk about today in decommissioning, is the recyclability of the product and what ultimately happens to it. In a new industry like wind energy, recycling tends to have a lag, during which time they develop methods of recycling things, and that's what's going on in the process with wind. However, we're pretty flippant about what we're willing to put in our public landfills, because we think, oh, it's going to the sanitary landfill, it'll be fine. Go ahead and throw all your fluorescent light bulbs that contain mercury and this and that. We don't care what we put in those landfills. And what we're talking about recycling primarily in wind turbines, as far as the blades go, is inert matter that has almost no possibility of affecting anything except filling up a hole in the ground. Another issue that people like to dwell on is the bird kill of these things. The Sierra Club supports wind farms I don't leave it to the Sierra Club. I look to the Audubon Society. The Audubon Society 100% backs properly sited wind farms. You can find that declaration on their website very easily. They feel that climate change is a much bigger concern for the population of birds going forward than the wind turbines are. So I would just urge you to keep those kinds of things in mind. And any of you that did not make the trip to tour the wind farm, I would encourage you to do so. I've done it. It's very enlightening, and I think it might change some perspectives if you didn't get the opportunity to do it the first time. And I will leave my comments at that, and I will leave you to do your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Other comments?
I want to talk about CO2 concentrations.
Come to the microphone if you would.
Is that allowed? It's on decommissioning.
Go ahead and
You know, the wind turbines and the solar farms are being created for the purpose of cutting on CO2 emissions during electrical generation. That's their purpose. And I just wanted to talk today about CO2 concentrations worldwide and the history of CO2 concentrations. And the United States in Antarctica a number of years ago went down and drilled into the ice core down to the rock, and they were able to tell each year of annual ice production and by the layers and the color of the ice. So they would take each year and melt it in a vacuum, and by doing that, then they would measure the CO2 concentration in the vacuum once the ice was melted. And it gave a accurate CO2 analysis of that particular year. Well, they had 800,000 years of analysis, the United States did, and then a Danish government agency came into a different part of Antarctica and found where they could drill deeper, and they went down and got 1 million years of data. And that shows, if I could draw it up there, but that'd take too much time. But there's 100-year cycles that graph out like this. The bottom of the graph is a glacial period. The top of the graph is the top of the interglacial period where you have the highest temperatures. The temperature you see is down to the bottom of the glacial period. The coldest temperature moves back up. And their testing on the CO2 that they did, it ranged from around 150 to 300 parts per million. And now if you see the latest graph that they show you, because we're at 400 parts per million now, which they say is a huge excessive amount of CO2 and that people can't handle that much and it's going faster. So the only thing they usually show you when they're trying to profess that thinking on people is that last glacier period that we were in. We're moving out of that into an interglacial period. So the CO2 has climbed up and is up to 400, like right here. That's what they show you. And the one thing that the graphs of the CO2 increase, they always say that the CO2 causes the temperature to increase. And these cycles are 100,000 years. In the first 600 to 800 years of any moving out of the glacier into the interglacial period, the CO2 rises for 600 to 800 years and then temperature rises. So there's no interrelationship, and this system shows it, this data shows it, that higher CO2 levels cause higher temperatures. That data, there's 1 million years of data. And then the second place where they've done research similar to this is off the northern coast of Brazil, and they did this with ships with drilling rigs on them. They went down to the ocean floor and then started drilling downward, and they could tell the year by the algae development, excuse me, and during the year they could tell what the year was. And then they would take that 1 year sample with the algae, remove the algae through freeze drying, and then do a CO2 test on the algae, and that's how they got CO2 levels. they were able, with the drilling off the coast of Brazil, northern Brazil, it's in the area where the Amazon runs into the ocean. And then that warm water moves north and affects all of our weather up here on the East Coast and in Europe. And they went down and they were able to get samples for 40 million years. That 40 million data shows the same 100-year cycles, 100,000-year cycles between glacial, interglacial, coldest to the hottest to the coldest down here. The same thing. So the way I look at it, God set it up in cycles, just like he does with the moon and the earth and everything that worked. Even gestation cycles of mammals, everything runs in cycles. And that's the way God created it. And the Brazil data in the ocean, their highest CO2 concentration were 1,400 parts per million, which is higher than what the ice core data was. Of course, the ice core data was in Antarctica. The other data from Brazil was out in the warm ocean in a warm climate, so there's a variation there. And then I wanted to use, after talking about those two things, I wanted to talk about what the British Navy did about 15 years ago. They did a study on sailors in the British Navy that serve in submarines. And the CO2 levels in a submarine range from 4,000 parts per million to 11,000 parts per million. That's excessive amounts of CO2. If you listen to the people that are against electrical production from fossil fuels, and they say that there's no way humans could survive at those levels of CO2, 4,000 parts per million to 11,000, there's no way humans could exist, but yet the British sailors were in that environment for decades and decades and decades. They did a study, and they took from 1965, 68, right in there, and for about 25 years, they took all of the British soldiers that served in submarines, and they served usually 120 days below the surface of the water in a submarine in these high excessive CO2 levels. And then they had 100 days on land, then 120 days in the submarine, 100 days on land, 120. That's the cycles that they serve in a submarine. And so they took about 25 or 30 years of data of soldiers that had served in submarines in the British Submarine and Naval Service and compared it to the general population. There were tens of thousands of soldiers that served in submarines, and they used an equal number of British citizens and compared their health data through their lives. And you would automatically think that those soldiers that served in the submarines would have, with that high exposure to CO2, would have had lung cancer, emphysema, all the lung-related diseases. The lung-related diseases in those British submariners was the same as the general population. Heart attacks, everything were the same. There was no variation, no huge increase in lung problems or anything with the British soldiers that served in the submarines. And so that kind of plays against the ideas that have been spread around. And it's really affected our society and put fear into people, the CO2 concentrations. Nebraska Public Power, this is a couple of years ago, had a meeting in Norfolk. They had several of them around the state, and it was about the future of electrical production in Nebraska. And it was all for open comment, primarily is what it was. People, they give you 5 minutes to get up and talk. There was one young lady there from northeast Nebraska that was a sophomore at the university, pre-law major. She got up and said that she is not going to have children because she felt it immoral to bring a child into this society and breathe these high CO2 levels. This younger generation has been listening to this for years, and it's really affecting society as a whole, and we need to change that. And I agree there's been enough negative talk about fossil fuel energy production that we need something else. And wind and solar are not dependable. And if South Dakota wants good factory development and population growth over the next 20 or 30 years, forget solar and wind. Now, there's a new technology. It's new and old. It's a nuclear fission, but it's not the old reactors that would take 6 to 8 to 10 years to build. They had one down in Brownville, Nebraska, it took 8 years to build. These MSRs are built in a factory, and then they're taken to the site and installed. They have a whole different cooling system. The SMRs are the reactors and put in a tank that maybe is 500,000 gallons of liquid in that tank, and that amount of liquid will keep that reactor cool. It doesn't need a pumping system to pump the water around the reactor to keep it cool like the old fusion systems that were built. These are much smaller. Now, I've been up in South Dakota, it's my 3rd year, and I'm impressed by this state and its innovative politics and the way they do things. It really is an impressive state. And this week, Governor Nome proposed a bill to the state legislature to give her the power, or not necessarily her, the governor in the state, the ability to deal with a federal nuclear agency that handles that. So, and also Tuesday, Bill Gates started construction in Wyoming. It was started on an SMR. So the technology is there. You've got a governor with the foresight to do what she's doing. Let this move forward and let that safe nuclear energy be the source of energy in the state until maybe 10 or 15 years down that nuclear fusion is finally developed and everything. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Public comment?
I apologize for coming in late. I had to go to the eye doctor and get something out of my eye that wasn't supposed to be there. My name is Lori Sletton. That's Rodney. We live in the middle of this whole wind farm thing. And I did do some research with the Audubon Society, and they're saying, you know, wind towers are fine. Just don't ever put them in the path of migration. They said use your brains. Don't put them there. So we shouldn't have them here because we're right in the path of the migration. And I got to drive through all the birds coming home from Williston. It was awesome. They're setting down on the fields and stuff. So we have a public information meeting on April 2nd, and you're all invited. So let me know afterwards if any of you are coming. The people in our neck of the woods would like to hear what you're doing to protect us. So there'll be a little spot for people that are on the task force to introduce yourself and let them know what you're doing. So, okay. I almost said the wrong church. Our Savior's Lutheran Church by Center Point.
What time?
7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, so let me know who can come, and we'll save a little spot for you, so thank you.
Thank you.
Spring Valley Lutheran.
Spring Valley Lutheran Church?
Is that right next to the colony?
Yes, right next to the company.
Yeah.
It's 2 miles north
Spring Valley Lutheran Church.
and a mile.
2 miles
West
north and
of
across the
Center
cemetery, and then along the cemeteries, it shows there.
If you type in the right name of the church, we'll get you there.
So again, it's Spring Valley
Valley.
Spring Valley Lutheran Church, April 2nd, 7 p.m.
Yes, ma'am.
And what's the general location for folks who don't know where that's at?
447th and 192.
So 447th and 192 Avenue.
93.
193, so that gets you in the area.
And it's right on the top of Turkey Ridge, which is,
Right on the top of Turkey Ridge. So I'm saying this for folks who are listening.
yeah.
So, okay, perfect. All right, I'll close public comment.
Could I ask one question?
Yes.
From the first presenter? Sir, could you provide us with your resources and where you got the information, especially the first one about the CO2?
For the Arctic ice cores,
Yeah. Did you have a article resource that you read or?
yeah, the ice core research has been online for a number of years. Just Google CO2 ice core research.
Okay, thank you.
And you can do the same thing to get the data from the ocean studies off the coast of Brazil. Just Google CO2 studies off the coast of Brazil in ocean studies.
Okay. So the speaker had said to go ahead and Google CO2 ice core,
Or Bing.
or Bing,
I prefer Bing.
to just search online for those general terms, and you should be directed in the right location. All
Thank
right.
you.
So we had 3 people gone last time at the meeting, and we had discussed setbacks there. And we decided that when we started this meeting, we would not start with setbacks, but we would try to start with decommissioning, because that's probably the last big thing. And then we're going to circle back around to setbacks, along with a couple of other things. So there were 2 documents that were set out. One is our current red line version that we've been working from our current ordinance. And the other document was taking everything we discussed, reorganizing it to reflect how the solar ordinance looks. So those 2 sections, at least if you're searching through, they have a similar look, if you will. So to begin with, I do believe it's to our best interest to look at the decommissioning that's based on the solar. And in that document, I had included Mike's comments, Mike Welsh's comments. If I get to that right section here. There we go. And his comments were underlined, I believe, because he was adding a little bit of clarification beyond what the solar is. So let's start with that. So the decommissioning would have a plan, a cost estimate, financial resources, notice to county, termination of use, liability insurance, and indemnity. And again, that's all based on what we had discussed in the solar. It's certainly more aggressive than what is in our current ordinance. But I do believe everything in our current ordinance is embedded in this, because we kind of stole from that to make the solar, if you will, so the language is there. So let's start from decommissioning a plan and just discuss if there's anything that either needs to be added, deleted, or amended or changed somehow. Are there any big red flags in that? Because the interesting thing about when you compare wind and solar, wind is got a heftier price tag than what solar does. So we want to make sure that what we're requiring here is doable. It makes financial sense based on how long the wind farm is expected to have a lifespan on that. So the plan, all applicants for a CUP shall provide with their site plan submission a decommissioning plan. The plan shall specify the procedure by which the applicant or its successor will remove all the structures, including equipment, fencing, roads, and foundations, and restore the area to its pre-construction condition. Disposal of structure and/or foundations shall meet the provisions of regulations of the South Dakota Environmental Protection Agency. And should that say South Dakota Department, South Dakota DANR? So that should say DANR is probably why it's underlined there. DANR. Or the United States Environmental Protection Agency. The plan will set forth a timeline for completing decommissioning once it is commenced. Do we see a need to change anything there? Sir? Yes.
When it was talking
Yep, and I'm just scanning forward to see if there's a place where maybe that states that. I know it does in our current, 4 feet is what our current says. Now, to be realistic, nobody's gonna remove all the concrete that's put in there. You're just not going to. It's kinda like boulders in the ground. So really the goal is, if you're going to farm it again, to at least have it at a depth where you can farm it, and that's probably why they chose 4 feet. So do we need to include, a reference in there, say, when it says including equipment, fencing, roads, and foundations to a depth of 4 feet? Yes, Mike?
Thanks, Sherry. I was looking at later on, or including it, but I had a comment on it too. A comment I had would be the decommissioning will involve removal of all equipment both above and below the ground, including all concrete and rebar, which will be ground, separated, and delivered to specific Yankton County locations in acceptable form for road aggregate. Now, the rationale for this is that the concrete was placed in there, and we're talking about removal of it, and who knows for years ahead what that land may be used for. And what we're really talking about here also is recycling. And this would sure be a way of taking all the concrete and rebar and putting it to use for Yankton County. So that was an inclusion, whether it's here or somewhere else.
Comments on that?
The cost of recycling concrete is exceeding the value of it in that case, so that's part of the reason you're leaving it there. And if you want to talk about cubic yards of concrete in place for the base of a wind tower power, you could compare it to the cubic feet of concrete in interstate highway overpass. And what's going to happen to those? Well, it's a lot easier to recycle those, and we have crushers to take care of that and recycle it. In the case of the base of the wind tower, it's probably problematic and prohibitive to try to recycle that concrete. No reason to do it.
I probably would take a different opinion on that, but I would look at it as a way of removing what was placed there, and again, using it because that is a product that is sure usable for the county, and this is only looking at getting it back to its original state. And with wind and erosion over time, who knows whether that 4 feet or whatever it is really adequate.
The 4 feet is a good number because it's below the frost line that causes heaving.
Yeah, but it's not to its original state.
Yeah, I can see where the 4 feet comes in, because that's where you put your water lines, that's how deep your foundations go for like a slab on the ground and stuff. The one thing though too is thinking about is returning the property to the same available or same potential uses that it had before. If you have concrete 4 feet below, that would be that's fine for farming, but that's it. You're gonna run into that concrete if you decide, oh, I wanna run a water line here or anything like that. So I don't know, I feel like maybe we can go a little deeper than 4 feet, but I also think that extracting the whole thing is not feasible and probably not necessary.
The development that I lived in the middle of, 300 and some turbines, their agreements as far as after the turbines were taken down at the end of the cycle, they went down 6 feet in those agreements. Because alfalfa roots go down 6 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And soybeans don't go down that far, the corn goes down around 4
remind me the diameter, circumference of that cement block? Is it 10 feet by 10 feet or 20 feet by 20 feet?
The base of the turbine was, I think we talked about 18 feet, the base, and it goes out. It's similar to a flagpole stand where you see the pole, but you don't see the stand underneath, and that is where the concrete is. I know it's.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is,
Oh, 20
we're
25
talking about
25
300 square feet
yeah.
and a quarter section of ground, it's insignificant.
25 to 30 feet, as I understand it, that goes down in the ground. So. And I think also too is some of these decommissioning situations end up where the concrete dynamite is used and technology is to blow it up as far as removal. So, and I know that.
What's the diameter of the tower? Did you say? I'm counting, I have to visualize it, so I'm counting tiles on the ceiling, they're 2 foot. Were they 20 foot in diameter? 15 foot? Gary, do you remember what those were? Trying to look. So 1, 2, 3.
No matter what they are, it's not much on a quarter section of ground.
16. No, to Don's point, it isn't. I mean, when you're out there digging in a field, I mean, they dug out huge boulders when they dug our basement. You know, you're gonna run into a rock.
I had the tower base was 12 to 14 feet wide and about 12 to 15 feet below ground.
Okay, so 12, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So we're talking 144 square feet in a quarter section of ground.
So it'd be less than this room, I'm sure,
lot
because if you,
less.
if you had a
It'd be less
12
than a
foot in
fourth
the
of this
center,
room.
and your concrete's gonna go out to the side, to your point, of the stand, the flag stand, if you will, on that. So, I mean, it'd be, less than this room, out in the middle of a 160 acre pasture. And if you dug down 4 foot or 6 foot, and then everything else would stay.
This is pasture or egg land.
Ag land. Ag land, because these won't be anywhere near the city of Yankton. They just won't be. They're not in the wind, for one. So they're gonna be ag land.
Yes. This is good points you have there about the location of these. If you look at, we have the maps shared in our information about the wind in Yankton County, and actually, most of Yankton County probably, according to those maps, does not have adequate average wind speed to support wind power. So there's not a reason to be concerned about putting up wind towers because the wind isn't there to do it. And somebody mentioned Turkey Ridge, that's, I think, one place up in that area where there may be wind, and therefore, it's a relatively small area that would qualify to have wind towers in Yankton County.
Are you referring to those maps that District 3 provided us with?
The ones
with setbacks?
that were shared since our last meeting, that came
Yeah,
from
wind
Gary.
potential.
And those are a highly significant factor, because as we mentioned before, to put up any wind towers, you have to put up meteorological towers for 2 years to prove you got the wind to support them. Otherwise, you're not gonna have any financing to do it, or any companies interested in doing it. So that's a significant factor to keep in mind.
So as of right now, the plan, the subpart A, there's been a request in the parentheses where it says including equipment, fencing, roads, and foundations, to include something that would say including equipment above and below ground, fencing, roads, and foundations to a depth of 6 feet. Now, Mike had also proposed to direct that they had to do something with that. I think that does get into an area of our ordinance that we don't police for any other application. You know, like someone's taking down a grain bin, a grain silo, something like that. We don't tell them they have to recycle it, they have to take it someplace. You know, so again, you get back to that balance of what are we gonna regulate and what are we going to not regulate on that. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just gonna say this, thank you for those comments, Sharon. I was just gonna say that we're really looking at a third party here, and in the various ordinances, the reference to bringing the setting back to its original state comes through in many situations. And yes, it probably was 4 feet or 6 feet or whatever it happens to be. But I think we're not talking about a resident that lives there, and whether he wants to remove it or not is something else. This is somebody on the outside that's placed it there and looking at protecting our property of Yankton County. We're interested. So that's where we're going.
Okay. So thoughts on that? Do we need to add additional language that says more beyond what's in print here, including the depth?
And I was looking at trying to help out.
And the above and below ground.
Help out the county, too.
So right now, we're at 6 feet or 4 feet?
One or the other, we haven't really,
I like 6 feet.
I like 6 feet as well.
I see a lot of 6-footers, so.
I think there's a logic
I'd
to
kinda
that,
like
be on the
10.
safe side.
I know.
It may be more than necessary in most cases, but it's
Okay.
protective for possible crop roots.
Okay, so do we see a reason to direct whoever's doing this work to do a specific thing with what they're digging out and disposing? Are we going to tell them where to put the wind turbines too? And the wire and
Yeah,
things
I
that, you
think
see where
that's-
I'm getting at
I
is,
think that's a little bit going over the top for this ordinance. I think, just saying that they have to make it go away, and however they do that is, as long as it's according to all the other laws of wherever it's going, so.
yeah, they're gonna have to follow all the EPA and all the DAN, South Dakota DANR disposals. You know, they could have someone who wants to put it along the river. The state could want riprap. And they put it along the river. Yes, sir.
I'd comment too, following up on Ryan's comment would be is that we sure would want to have it in the ordinance, which we're talking about including it in there so that you or I as property owners, we know what we're getting into before we enter a contract. If there was ever a concern.
Okay. So, are we wanting to add more language, or are we not wanting to add more, hang on, more language?
To me, this is another area where we can get so restrictive that it just says we aren't gonna have any. I kinda try to balance the things that I don't like about wind towers with the fact that someday we may need this as a source of electricity. And I wouldn't wanna go out to the people in Yankton County and say, well, in 5 more years, we can develop a wind farm and you can have electricity in 5 years. We're getting something.
Thoughts on that?
I would agree with that, and it's really important to look at this from both perspectives of pro and anti, if you will, or wind development, and the people that want to have wind power developments on their property. You can get into trouble on both ways, so you have to be careful to keep an open mind and look at it from both perspectives to protect the property owners that are opposed to having a tower within view of their place, and those that are very much in favor for a lot of good reasons. Economic, value to the people, all of that we've covered before. My point is, we need to be open-minded and fair to both parties, or you get into trouble either way. Thank you.
When the concrete is installed, Gene, do you know how deep they go when they put it in the first place?
I don't have the figure on that. I have photos of it, but I don't know the precise depth. I think there was something quoted from our tour, wasn't there, Gary?
Yeah, I just mentioned that a minute ago.
It's 12 to
So
15
it's
feet. I've heard
about
as deep as
12 to
20
Yeah.
feet, but
feet below ground.
Below ground.
I've heard the figure 15 feet is a lot.
Basically, I think
Yeah.
that's,
So is that the top of the slab or the bottom of the slab? The 15 feet,
total depth in the ground
Total
from
depth.
ground level.
the bottom,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
Sir?
Yes, from the perspective of farming, farmers rely upon a deep bucket for the provision of of water for the plants. And 6 feet depth where you're planting a crop is not enough, because it goes much deeper than that. And that's something, they've gone to the expense to dig a hole in the ground for a foundation for their machine. And now it doesn't work anymore, so they're gonna pull it out of the ground, or they're gonna take all of the junk with it? Or are they going to leave that in there for a farmer have to farm over something that no longer has the ability to store the water necessary for food production? Now, I know it's a small space, but if you've got several of those, it's a problem. And for the individual that's farming just over that one, he knows that that area is probably not gonna be as productive as it could be. And that's part, they go to the trouble from the standpoint of physics to put something in the ground that will support this system. It needs to be taken completely out so that the original system that was in there can function again. It can't function, again, going back to this situation that I mentioned last week, that it's going into an area, modifying it for its particular needs, and then once they no longer can use that area, they're not cleaning up after themselves. And yes, it's gonna cost more money to pull that out, but that has to be something that they know on the front end that they're going to have to do at some point. And they need to clean it up and get rid of it, so it's restored to where, as the rules over there that he read were, and that is to remove all of it. You
So,
don't
Sir, do you-
so
define
the
all.
comment from the audience was, and he's a farmer, who said that a depth of 6 foot would still impact his crop because the roots of the plants would not have access to that really deep water and to be able to go further for the water reservoir, if you will. So his comment was that he felt everything needed to be removed to return it to the original use of the property. Don, did you have a question?
Sir, do you variable rate plant when you plant corn?
Pardon me?
You have a variable rate planting process when you plant corn?
No, I don't use a variable rate, it just goes into the ground
One depth,
one depth, yeah.
okay.
Yeah. That might be something that could be done, but there's a certain degree of window there as far how deep that kernel should go
Yeah.
for it. to
And
be-
so then my other response is, we're talking about maybe, I don't know what it is, 150 square feet. Maybe there's 3 of them, so that's 500 square feet of crop ground, which is what? 100 stalks of corn?
Maybe,
Yeah, and you're getting paid $15,000 a year to have that thing on your ground.
$15,000 a year, that's what, $1,250 a month?
Buy a lot of corn with that.
So to kind of support,
But it still doesn't go back to the initial principle.
so to go back to the counterpoint to that argument is if I'm a landowner and I agree to have a wind turbine set on my property, I get paid for the life of whatever it is, 20 or 30 years. I know that's there, and I know going into it, it's only gonna be removed to a depth of 6 foot.
That's right.
And I signed the contract. And so there is some risk on the landowner. That is up to the landowner. I mean, it's like anything else that say I decide to dig for sand. and they go out and they dig the hillside out and they didn't find sand.
And there's nothing in there, this does not preclude the landowner from
The land-
requiring them to remove it all.
The landowner could
They-
add that to the
be-
contract.
You know, that can still be added. We're just creating the minimums required.
That is correct. That's a good point, Ryan.
They would still have the joint, they could still insist that all of it be removed.
Yeah,
The landowner.
At the origin,
Pardon?
at the origin, at negotiations of the origin of your contract, you
At the
could,
contract
you
level,
could
yep.
do that if you wanted to. It might prevent you from getting the wind tower on your property if you really wanted one. But more importantly, I have a comment about this as a farmer, grew up on a farm, and I still own farmland that's farmed, and it's near wind towers and all of that, and this business about 6 feet, removing the concrete to 6. If you look at the layers of the soil and the water, et cetera, we already talked about going to 6 feet to be sure the roots that are gonna go that deep can indeed do what they need to do. The statements about this rooting a crop, et cetera, I don't find that, as a biologist, find that accurate, or as a farmer, feel that's accurate either. I think that's a gross exaggeration, but that's my perspective, and it's a personal judgment, so I'll leave that at that. Thank you.
Okay, so, back to the board here. Are we good with adding the above and below ground for the equipment, and then foundations to a depth of 6 foot?
I vote yes for that.
I vote yes.
Got a
Yes,
couple,
please.
I've got 4 head shakers that are okay.
Okay, I would rather see it either completely removed or a little bit deeper, because just knowing how when you have like clay or anything else in the ground, it does affect how your crops will grow. And I don't have any research or studies, but it just seems to me like when you have a block of cement that's under your ground, it is going to affect how the water moves through that soil, and that will affect your crops. And so, then it's kind of the determination of, is it up to us to decide, or is it up to the landowner? But the problem I am wondering about is when Gary said those people that are signing these contracts don't even know what the regulations are. And so it's almost kind of concerning that we have people who are signing up for stuff and they don't even know what we as a county have already decided. So how do we go about making sure that people who are gonna sign up for all this stuff, they don't know what they're getting into, and you
I believe somebody said that anybody that's considering putting up a wind tower doesn't have an attorney read the contract, he's making a bad mistake.
right.
That is
But
correct.
even Gary said they don't even come in and ask him what the regulations are or what our
That's
current
the attorney's
policy is.
responsibility. It's the landowner's responsibility, but it's also the attorney's responsibility. No one understand the law, ordinances.
Well, and then that goes
You gotta have some responsibility at some level as a landowner. I'm not saying I'm for the wind farms, I'm just saying, I'm trying to be reasonable on this and look for a win-win for both sides.
Right, so that's where I'm kind of like conflicted, because it's like, I would like to see it removed if it was gonna be put on, well, you know, if they wanted to put it on property that I own, I would want it removed, but is that, like, do we have to have it that restrictive? So if we just had 6 feet, but people need to understand they can request, I don't want it 6 feet, I want it completely removed when they sign their contract or whatever.
Okay, Mike?
Another consideration, and I don't, if I'm gonna forget Ryan's comment, I don't know if you can do it, or if we can do that or not. Okay, so a permit is required to get or obtain or develop one of these wind turbines, okay? So, what if there was a requirement such that the applicant, if it's, and is the farmer or the landowner, are they the ones that obtain it, or is it the developer?
I think in most cases it's the developer.
Okay. What if there also had to be some expectation that the agreement has been reviewed by an attorney such that the landowner can sign off on that, so that when there is an application, then that would be required before a permit by the developer would obtain their permit. And why I'm saying this is because, like, it's been mentioned by Don too, the responsibility of the landowner. Tuesday of this week, I talked to a landowner that signed one of these contracts in Yankton County within the last year. And I said, what about the obtaining of a review by an attorney? Well, I saw others were getting them, so I thought, well, maybe I should go ahead and get one too. That may not be a responsible answer, but this is a party who's been around many years and active in a lot of activities. And so, how do we protect the landowner from an outside group coming in with the experience that we've been hearing about for 8 weeks of what's happening, plus some other locations? And I'm looking again, protecting the landowner. And then back, whether it's 6 feet or 8 feet, everybody knows up front, and that's been determined.
Well, you hate to say, okay, try to require another attorney review. Does that put us on the hook of making sure, as a county, that every contract is reviewed? And then does that then have every landowner assuming that we're going to be paying for attorneys to look over their contracts, you know? I don't think we wanna start going down
I
that
don't
path.
want the liability.
Yeah,
I didn't,
I don't want
but,
that.
I didn't.
yeah.
Well, and who's to say it's a good lawyer? I mean,
Uh-huh.
I've met some pretty awful
That's
lawyers
right.
in my time
Yeah.
period. I mean, and that goes to every, so again, when we're talking about wind, we have to envision it being a business. And any business that we police via our ordinance, whether it's a bar, whether it's a grain elevator, a processing facility, whatever it is, because every one of those has risks associated with them. And I can tell you, right now, we are never going to ordinance out all the risk to anyone, because everybody has their own mind, and they could look at that, say, I'm not listening to anything you people say, and I'm signing whatever I wanna sign. So there, again, you get to that balance, and recognizing, to Don's point, you have to look at both sides. I mean, you really have to counterpoint it, and to say, to require somebody to go to a lawyer before they make their decision. We don't require them to go to a lawyer before they sign that mortgage for 8%, and they're borrowing $500,000, and they're making $10 an hour. We don't do that. I mean, again, it goes back to, there has to be a landowner responsibility, and there's a county responsibility. And I'm really against requiring anything to do with them consulting a lawyer. Because, again, we're forcing them to pay for that, because we're not paying for it. As Don said, the county's not gonna step up and pay for that. I think we're getting down a road we don't wanna go down.
I think all we can ever say is we recommend you consult your lawyer.
That's right.
I mean, that's with anything.
And that's with
If you're
and
writing
that's
a
with
will
everything.
or whatever it is, I
Mhm.
mean, you always recommend you talk to somebody who knows what they're doing.
Can we go back? Are you gonna keep pre-construction condition in there, those words?
Let's see, and restore the area to the pre-construction condition. Is there a
Take-
better word?
Take that out, because that's not true.
Yeah. If we're
Pre-construction
leaving,
condition.
if we're leaving part of the foundation in the
Yep,
ground,
yep.
it's not pre-construction.
So what would be
condition
better?
Well, personally, this is the way I feel about it. They come in, they put that stuff in there, they should remove it when they leave. They're the ones getting the money, and we're left with garbage in our ground, okay? And if, you know, if it just, that's the thing that irritates me the most, is the fact that, you know, we say we want electricity. This is not our electricity that we're gonna be using here in Yankton County, okay? This is for the big cities, because that's where the electricity is needed. They're using our land and destroying our land to take the electricity somewhere else. And I think when they're done, when they're all said and done, and they're pulling up stakes, and they've gotten all their tax credits from the federal government, and their pockets are loaded with my tax money, by the way, they should have to remove it and restore it back to what it was when they found it, or when they first came.
What did they do with the dam system when they put all the dams across all the United States, flooded out millions of farm acres?
Well, the thing I see with the dams is, from what I've learned in history, the threat of flooding down by Vermilion and even Yankton here, I see that, you know, when they put the dams in, especially, and I know a little bit more about, and I say Lawrence, Kansas, because my sister lives there, and her husband's my brother-in-law's family.
I guess my question is,
we're bought
do you
but,
think the farmer beyond Gavin's Point Dam gives a damn about electricity down? He cared more about the land that he got that was flooded.
Well, I hope
That's the way we're in society.
But here's the thing, I hope that farmer realizes the danger that posed to the people downriver when those ice jams broke in the spring and that water comes rushing down. I mean, that's the thing I see with the dams. I see that as they were built for the safety aspect, especially, Gavin's here, just for the ice breaking in the spring. And then electricity and everything was the side note, to it.
Well, the farmers that
Yeah.
had the ground that is now flooded by the Lewis and Clark Lake, they got to sell their land, and so it's a
Sure,
little bit
do you think they
different.
wanted to?
Well, my grandpa was a willing participant.
Okay.
So, and he was happy with the deal that he got, so.
So I'm just saying, you gotta take out pre-construction, because that's not true.
I think
We have a
pre-construction.
clarification on that.
Yeah, one of the things I'm thinking is, okay, we're digging out a big foundation, we're leaving a pretty big hole, and we want to make this back into good agricultural ground, and I think when you fill that hole in, what you fill that hole in is gonna make a big difference on what your productivity is gonna be in the future, and so and I think we need to say something of restoring it to, productive agricultural ground
You know,
or something.
we're talking about this little, maybe it's
Because
400 square foot of ground.
Yeah, but you wanna fill it with good.
You got roads coming into that tower
Uh-huh.
that are what, 12 feet wide or 10 feet wide? Maybe up to a half a mile long. That's way, way, way more ground that goes out of production
Yep.
than.
And so what I think we should, it should be talked about is like, yeah, we want this to be something, okay, if it's farm ground, it needs to be able to be farmed after they're done. It can't have big rocks, you just can't fill it full of sand. It has to be, and so there has to be something in there, sort of that catch-all, but I think the pre-construction gives this idea that it's completely restored, which it is not.
I agree with that.
To address what you were saying, I think you had mentioned, someone up there had mentioned earlier, that if the farmer does, or the landowner does insist that all be removed, if that phrase is in the contract, that's fine, but the landowner has to be informed that that is something that he needs to consider when he starts dealing with these companies. Because if the companies just cover that particular phrase up so that the farmer doesn't see it or realize what that means, then he's hanging himself without knowing it. And that's, you properly inform each of the individual. It's up to him when he decides that as to what is going to happen. Now, the minimum of 4 foot or 6 foot or whatever is fine, but if he has insist and expect, and that it will happen, that all of it will be removed if that's what he desires, whether it's the foundation of the tower, or it's the roadways and everything else that has basically been destroyed because of the installation of this system. You gotta undestroy it, and that's the responsibility of the person who's profiting off of something that is going away, far away from us. And there's really no positive as far as our situation is concerned, as farmers and as people in this beautiful country we've got. We don't need to have it poked full of holes, and then all of a sudden that's the way it's like.
And I think that goes back
$15,000
to,
a month has to be, you have to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
The $15,000, the
No,
farmers
$15,000
get.
doesn't mean a heck of a thing, not to the individuals that have put these things up.
Thank you.
I wouldn't do it for $15,000 a year. There's no way I would, because
Good,
I would not
good.
want to threaten
Good,
my ground
good,
with something
good,
like
that's
that.
great. We're not, but others would.
Well,
Yeah.
there maybe are some that would, but what about the people surrounding them also?
So that's not where we're at, we're on decommissioning right now.
Okay,
As a farmer-
so here,
As a farmer listening in on this, I think you should leave the word in there that it needs to be put back to the pre-existing situation. And for me, that would mean that means taking all the cement out of there and putting topsoil back on there instead of big old boulders. It's zoned agriculture, it's meant to be agriculture. When the wind tower's no longer there, it should be put back the way it was. As far as the stupid people that sign, forgive me, as far as the people that sign without checking with their attorneys, and even those that I know, you know how tricky these people are, they're difficult to deal with. I have heard people tell me they went to 2 different attorneys, and they wish they hadn't done it. Even the people that tried, because they couldn't get answers, you know, but that doesn't matter. The landowner's responsible for what they signed. That's a bummer, but I think we should put the agricultural land back to the agricultural land. And I know for certain, I mowed a cemetery, the cement foundation of the original church, when you put it, I knew exactly where it was. Because nothing's gonna grow there again, the way it's supposed to. And as a farmer, I know that you have stuff next to cement, it's not gonna grow nicely. You disturb the water level, all that. It should just be put back into agriculture land when they're all done with profiting off of us. And mostly, I don't think they're gonna get their $15,000 anyway. They're probably gonna get 5 or 8, but, you know, whatever. That's their decision, whether I like it or not.
And the way I see it, they're restoring it for the next generation. Because if it lasts 20 years, I'm, 30 years, it's restoring it for the next generation. And this is what bothers me, is what we're talking about, 15,000 for this farm. That's one generation wealth. What's the next generation gonna be dealing with? And that's the thing I see it, is taking it out, restoring this all to ag, which is correct, for the next generation.
And that's what I question about where the next generation's gonna get their electricity and how that's all gonna work. We're talking about little nuclear sites as a possibility. My thought was, we need to have another task force on nuclear sites. Cause they could blow the hell out of a whole bunch of people quite a distance apart with just a small nuke.
so I'm gonna cut in here.
You're over exaggerating that to the point of scare people, that's ridiculous.
So I'm gonna cut in here because we need to stay on task.
You're gonna blow up a small modular reactor?
So we need to,
People, that's terrible what you just did.
we need to
I don't know.
stay on task here, our focus, please,
That's wrong.
please. So I'm gonna read this again and see what you think of this. So the plan shall specify the procedure by which the applicant or its successor will remove all structures, including equipment above and below ground, fencing, roads, and foundations to a depth of 6 feet, and restore the area to a productivity level that matches the surrounding land. It could be a pasture. It could be on the top of a hill, and I guarantee you there's a rock 2 feet below the surface. I guarantee you, because I hit them all the time with our four-wheelers, the ones that happen to pop up. So, and it could be on someone's 250 bushel acre cornfield. It could be anywhere, so if we say it matches the surrounding land, that gets it back there. Now, to the point of foundations out there and not growing stuff, I have all kinds of farm foundations because we bought land that had previous people there and they're everywhere. I have no idea where this stuff is. We don't regulate that. We don't. We don't force people to take down abandoned property. We don't force them to take down all the unused silos that are out there, and you can count them. You all know where they're at because they were used at one time and not one of them is used today. I have one, wondering what the heck we're gonna do with it someday. So you can only police so much, and again, it goes back to the balance. We have to try to identify at least some of the risk associated, do a reasonable job to mitigate that risk. And again, it comes down to the landowner. If landowners don't want this in Yankton County, they don't sign up for the thing, but we obviously have people who do want it. So we're trying to balance those two very polar viewpoints.
I want to, just another interesting thought here, though. We're talking about these foundations, and these foundations are big, they're massive, they're very permanent. In fact, as you know, a concrete foundation will last over 100 years.
Just like a rock.
So
I'd rather
one
do
of the
that.
things here is if we do require a strong decommissioning and removal of that foundation, the counter of that would possibly encourage these companies building the wind farms that they are going to make the most use out of that foundation. You know, especially if we're talking about a wind farm that's, or if these windmills only last 20 years, you're not going to invest, you know, if that much cost is into it, and you got that foundation there, you want to keep using it as much as possible. That's to the benefit of the farmer, to the landowner, to get that rent money more. So I don't know, that's the counterpoint of possibly putting in a strong decommissioning. It also encourages them to really use the infrastructure that they're putting in, so that we're not just putting in infrastructure and 20 years later ripping it out.
I'd like to add something to this, if I may, please. Interesting thing about the structures, the basis for wind power towers, there is new technology, new design, which uses structural, like an analogy to a roof, forgetting the terminology, but with the structure of the roof such that, well, anyway, a frame of concrete, and there's an article that I have saved about this. Anyway, it's like 1/7 of the concrete is used with the structural triangles that are connected together, still below, but it's 1/7 of the concrete. The point is, we have some rapid changes forthcoming in wind power and that way, just like with the towers, in efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. So, point is, we need to be prepared for the change, which will be good, and we may have a whole different set of plans for wind tower bases in the future that'll be a lot more advantageous and easier to take care of and not need to be worried about quite as much.
Don, did you have something?
That gravel road bothers me. That's a half, the wind pond is just a little piece of ground. The gravel road that runs up to a half a mile maybe, or maybe even longer, through a person's field. You're gonna see that
For a while, yeah.
when you need to reclaim that ground too. That's not gonna get productive.
Sherry, could I offer a suggestion?
You bet.
It's easy for us to get wrapped around the axle with a lot of peripheral issues. If I could just offer a suggestion that maybe we just leave paragraph capital A, sub small a, exactly as it is, it solves all problems. In other words, it would read, the plan shall specify the procedure by which the applicant or its successor will remove all structures, including equipment, fencing, roads, and foundations, and restore the area to its pre-construction condition. That solves every problem that we've talked about so far. Now, as far as the cost of removing the concrete, I honestly don't have a lot of sympathy with the companies, the large corporations and the deep-pocketed investors who are going to install these things. If they can install them, they can remove them. That would be my perspective on it. And failing my perspective, a minimum depth would be 6 feet, because there's erosion, there's a lot of things, depth of roots and so forth. But if you just keep the paragraph exactly as it is, it solves every issue that we've been discussing so far.
So thoughts on that? So essentially what Mike is saying is that it would include everything. Doesn't matter the depth, everything goes.
Right.
So, thoughts on that?
And I think, removing everything sounds excessive, but then as I think about that, the idea that foundation might be usable for 100 years, and 100 years of payments to the farmer is worth something now. And so I like the idea of encouraging them to keep using that foundation for its life, rather than saying, oh, we're gonna move over here now because someplace is cheaper.
So Don wanted me to read it one more time. It would say, the plan shall specify the procedure by which the applicant or its successor will remove all structures, including equipment, fencing, roads, and foundations, and restore the area to its pre-construction condition. So that would imply, reading that, everything goes. The gravel goes, the concrete goes, all the wires. And you wouldn't have to say above and below, because it says all.
So you're gonna have to take all the electrical wires and.
Everything.
Everything.
All of it.
Everything would be ripped out. That's what it implies.
It just simplifies things. We can get so specific that we confuse ourselves. And keeping in mind, this is not a government project that is designed by the government for the benefit of the people. These are projects that are designed by corporations who are for-profit corporations, and they can include all of these things, both the construction and the decommissioning, in their pricing model. And we heard on the Zoom meeting last week, in response to a question, that wind energy projects are profitable even without government subsidies. That was an answer that was given. And if that's the case, they're capable of setting up a pricing model that will compensate them for the eventual cost of decommissioning. It's just like you would do if you're if you're running a factory over here at L&M Radiator, you're setting up your pricing model so that you're accumulating cash in order to put a new roof on when it's due. Every business does that, and they set aside cash for eventualities. They set aside cash for improvements, and there's no reason that they can't set aside cash for decommissioning in the way that Yankton County requires.
So, with that said, are we good with just keeping A?
I have a suggestion,
Yes, sir.
which would be something like add or per contractual agreement arrangement between landowner and large-scale wind power developer. That gives some options for doing things differently if both parties agree to it and set it in a contract. That's a suggestion.
That's a good idea going forward, Gene. The question is, I think a lot of people may have already signed these contracts.
Mhm.
And so, and they may not have been,
No, that would be part of the contract,
right.
which they're looking at in black and white to sign, so it's pretty straightforward at the origin.
Right.
And it may be very advantageous for both parties.
But this ordinance is going forward, it's, what's back and behind, it's too late, we can't solve every problem.
Right, right, and so
It
it isn't
gives
gonna
some
help anybody.
flexibility.
The only thing I think though is like, if we did that, they could put into the contract that they don't have to remove the foundation at all.
Well, that would be the contract that's signed by both parties.
Yeah, and.
That's the point of the
And I
contract.
feel a little bit in Yankton County, we do wanna have part of that foundation pulled out.
Oh,
So
yeah.
It's a really
That's-
rough thing, cause like now it could be, I don't care, I'll, you
I
know,
agree.
for an extra $50 a month, I will, yeah, leave the concrete there forever. You know, you
Well,
have a landowner that says that, you know.
I
I'm
know
saying,
how
put in a
local-
minimum depth of 6 feet, and beyond that, or if you want
Yeah, I think we
negotiated
still want
agreement.
to have that minimum 6 feet depth, irregard, you know, overriding any contract. I
Right.
think we want to have that 6 feet depth, and then and how we word that to have both those options that they can contractually say we can leave behind the foundation. Or maybe that's a sub part of A or something that
See, we're still,
contractually they can have in there that they can
we're still
remove it to 6
confusing
feet,
ourselves.
But
No, what
It
I'd
gets
like
a-
to add to that is say a minimum of 6 feet, which is also probably 2 feet or 1 foot more than was originally suggested. So we're giving extra there, but then say, or if we want more material removed, it's negotiable between the landowner and
And-
wind power developer.
and if it's not stated in contract, then it is full removal of everything.
Or a minimum.
Okay, so
whichever way
maybe
we
if you
put
wanna,
it.
maybe if you wanna say less than what the original says, then say unless you have a contract that states otherwise. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at. It's like, so we're trying to find a compromise with the idea of having it fully restored, fully removed, but then still having this option, you know, because there's cases where it's like, okay, it's up on the top of a hill in a pasture, that having it removed to by 6 feet is more than enough.
You
So-
may have shock rock for a base. You
Yeah.
may have to go deeper or
Yeah.
something, you know, there's a lot of variability there, and I think one wants to be careful not to pigeonhole yourself and stay locked in and be impossible to do anything, when it would be best to be able to have that flexibility.
There is a sentence in our current ordinance that says, any agreement for removal to a lesser depth or for no removal shall be recorded with the county zoning administrator, which shall show the locations of all such foundations.
And so that
That's
would be
very
part
good.
of that CUP that then they're coming in for permits.
So,
So
and
as commissioners, we would be able to review and see this, and as the planning commission,
And
we'd
does
be
that
able to review and see
get
this.
filed on the deed then?
you could put that language in there.
Yeah, and I think it should be filed on the deed too.
Should be, yeah, it's just not
That's right.
Gary's responsibility to track that down.
That would be a permanent record of what's left in the soil.
So,
I would definitely agree with that, cause there may be times that somebody decides afterwards, maybe they wanna put a garage on that foundation or something. Who knows, I mean, it could be a feeder shed, whatever, I mean, there could be a lot of things that people wanna use that stuff for.
Yeah, I mean-
We've had that in the past, and-
They're repurposing missile silos, so,
exactly.
It's conceivable a farmer might want one of the roads for
Mhm.
something at some point in time, so if you leave him that option for.
Sherry, read that language again, it sounded pretty good.
says, any agreement for removal to a lesser depth or for no removal shall be recorded with the county zoning administrator, which shall show the locations of all such foundations. So I can take that sentence and I can change it to have it be recorded with the deed.
Right.
And, maybe to put any instead of any agreement for removal, maybe, you know, some kind of a contract or whatever, but we could put that sentence right at the end of A, where it says pre-construction condition, and then have the
Right.
sentence in there.
Right, that way you keep the paragraph exactly as it is and just add that
Just
sentence
add that
to the
sentence
end.
on the end.
And that way we're allowing people the discretion to use common sense and good judgment, which is
Gary,
sometimes limited.
It's 13B of our current ordinance. It's about midway through that paragraph, site restoration, if you're curious where I stole that. Okay,
Would it be too much to just say that any variation to the depth?
well, this, how it says, for any agreement for removal to a lesser depth.
Yeah,
And I would think that would include roads and wires and all of that.
and I was
So
just thinking of the
it's a
case of where they
general.
where they put in the contractual agreement to remove it all. That's also recorded too, you know?
Every
And that's sort of
soil
like this
erosion
map.
condition.
Anything that's varying from our 6-foot requirement is,
Well, actually, right now, we don't have a 6-foot requirement, because
Yeah.
we went back to the word all.
oh, okay.
Remember? We've got
All.
that, all.
Oh, well then that already covers it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, so I think we're good.
Yeah,
So for now, can we move on until
yeah,
we see all of that in a red line version? Yeah,
Yes,
Mike?
please.
yep.
Just, where does the property owner get involved in this?
Well, they should. I don't know, maybe I'm just an anal landowner, but you step foot on my property, I know what you're doing, and I know exactly what you're doing, because we have WAPA power lines on ours, and we don't let them on our property unless they have a plan. I mean, so we're really aggressive, and sometimes I don't think of the folks who aren't, who think it's, you know, whatever you do is fine. But just because they have an easement on my property, doesn't mean they come on my property. Unless they have a reason and we know when, kind of thing, so sometimes I err on my side and not the other side.
And I appreciate discussion here. Just comment I would make though too, is we're not talking about those developers that we're going to be seeing every day and have seen in the past. We're talking about developers that are professional in what they're doing, and they're here to sell the turbines. And for the number of them that are put up and questionable about what involvement was the property owner before that, I continue to challenge that. Another situation was one that was signed last June, and it was the attorney on it was from Southern California. Property owner is a well-educated person, a farmer, and he's not concerned, he's not aware of these types of conditions. I'm not to belabor the point here, but yesterday's paper, Governor, watch out for China buying U.S. farmland. Noam tells the Agriculture Committee, which was in Washington, you were there. So here we have a situation where we have and the concern is owning the land. With a wind farm, you have the ability, and it's almost perceived with the controls on it, you have a control of it. The company or the developer has control of it. It's a foreign company, many times, as we've seen, it gets traced back to China, and that control is up to 50 years. Now, what have they done? The governor's talking about purchasing. They've acquired the control of the land with no capital. And the capital that is used are wind currents, wind subsidies from Washington. So the capital financing part of it has come through the US, but yet they're the ones that are controlling this land. And I think that when you're also realizing the comment that Lauren was talking about as far as dollars, a wind farm, let's say it generates $1 million or whatever it is, the farmer or the property owner is receiving less than 4%, less than 4%. So the investment is X, and they're receiving less than 4% of a return on that property, and from what the revenue is being generated. And, you know, and they have nothing unless they have the property owner. So, I mean, it's just very one-sided. Again, outside, the concern with not knowing who you're really working with, the turnover every so many years to take care of liability issues, there's just a lot of red flags. So that's why I've raised some of these questions. And it gets right down to helping the parents, help educating the property owner, which I guess maybe we don't have that responsibility, and that's something else, but at least that's where I'm coming from. So, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so for now, can we say, A, the plan, we've kind of discussed as far as we're going to today? Okay, so let's move on to B, which is the cost estimate. So we've got a section here, it's got 4 points. The decommissioning plan shall include a decommissioning cost estimate prepared by a licensed professional engineer. The cost estimate shall provide the estimated cost of decommissioning in accordance with the decommissioning plan and any other applicable conditions set by the county. The cost estimate above will be reviewed and analyzed by a third-party engineer of the county's choosing. And that sentence was an addition from Mike. The applicant or its successor shall compensate the county for any third-party review and analysis by an engineer of the initial cost estimate. And the last point is the applicant or its successor shall update the decommissioning cost every 5 years following approval of the conditional use permit and compensate the county for any review and analysis of each cost estimate revision by a licensed professional engineer. So I did notice recently, and you probably all saw the headline, that the solar farm out by Rapid City, New Underwood, is going into commission early. And they did have an article that touched on they are reviewing theirs every 10 years. Then, no, I misstated that. The first decommissioning cost estimate was supposed to be at 10 years, and then I think every 5 years after that to update it, because they had quite a bit of variability in theirs because of the scrap metal costs were so variable on that. So any adjustments, so the underlined sentence there that I read was proposed by Mike Welsh. That is not currently in our solar ordinance. So that is essentially just talks about cost estimate, and we are requiring one initially. Any changes?
As a landowner, we would really like you all to discuss requiring a bond for the decommissioning, because we keep
Okay,
hearing.
I'm gonna stop you there.
Yeah,
We're
it's
not to
coming.
that section yet.
But that's in there somewhere.
We're not
Item
there
C.
yet.
Thank you.
Okay, so part C is financial resources.
Someplace in there and other expenses, I'd like to see some language, and I don't know if it can be done properly, but some about legal expenses, potential legal expenses that the county might face. And
We might get to that, so hold that thought. Legal expense, I'm gonna make a note of that.
because if these guys decommission a road and there's an argument over whether there's topsoil there or not topsoil, or whether it's 6.5 foot or 4.5 foot, it's gonna cost a hell of a lot of money to battle that out in court.
Okay. We'll see if we get, if this other stuff includes that, Don, and if it doesn't, then we'll find a place to review and sneak that in. So financial resources, which is bullet C under decommissioning. 50% of the estimated decommissioning cost will be placed into an escrow account held by the county at the beginning of the WEX construction phase. The balance of the decommissioning cost estimate will be guaranteed with a surety bond so as to cover 100% of the estimated decommission costs. B, each year after the beginning of the WEX construction phase, the applicant or its successor will contribute an additional 5% of the most current cost estimate to the escrow account, allowing for the reduction of the surety bond by the same percentage, not the obligation, to undertake decommissioning financed by the financial agreement required for a conditional use permit. I don't think I read that as smooth as I could have. Part C, should the 5-year updated cost estimate increase, the applicant or its successor will increase the required escrow and surety bond combination as outlined above to meet the percentages for the given year. Amounts may be reduced at the discretion of the county if an updated cost estimate shows a decrease from the previous cost estimate. And finally, D, the county will credit interest to the escrow account on a monthly basis. So that is language, all taken from solar, except for that part that's underlined in B. So essentially, 50%, and then 10 years later, it should be fully funded. So at year 10, we should have an escrow account that has the entire estimated decommissioning cost in it.
So, this is probably a question for someone experienced in this wind industry, but what is a typical decommissioning cost today for one of these wind towers? Just one.
You know, I think, Mike, did you send something out? I have.
That was about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know I have a printed copy of, the cost of decommissioning wind turbines is huge. So this here, decommissioning the Palmers Creek Wind Facility in Chippewa County, Minnesota, so this is from 2019, is estimated to cost $7 million for decommissioning 18 wind turbines, which is about $410,000 per turbine. And that was 5 years ago. Well, in November it'll be 5 years. So that was before 10% inflation per year. So,
I think we had one from the PUC too, but I'd have to.
did you, Gary?
Yeah,
I might have missed that one.
that was a little newer than that.
So, I think 410 is low. And these turbines, I'm assuming, are smaller turbines because they're probably at least 20, 25 years old in Chippewa County. So, I mean, even if you said they were $1 million a turbine. And they're supposed to be, how many turbines in Swan Lake? 80? Was that right? Not all of them are in Yankton County.
104 or something.
104, say there's 100, not all of them will be in Yankton County. So say there's 20,
40,
25, that'd be 20, 25 million.
I thought they said 97 turbines total in the Swan Lake project. And when you look at the landmass, about 60% of it is in Turner County and about 40% of it is in Yankton County. So if they were equally placed, we'll end up with probably 38 or 39 turbines
Okay,
or so. And I think, you know, that, again, the cost, we should be able to get a pretty good cost estimate, and that's the reason why I thought it would be wise to have Cost estimate shall provide the estimated cost of decommissioning in accordance with the plan by a licensed professional engineer, and then I back that up by saying the cost estimate above will be reviewed and analyzed by a third-party engineer of the county's choosing. That way we're covering ourselves, because the first one is done by a licensed professional engineer, and then it's corroborated by an independent third party. And so I think whatever cost estimate we get will probably be pretty accurate. The big thing is that they're making sure that they're covering us for the cost.
You're right on the number. The letter from the Department of Energy says approximately 97. But it doesn't say how many in Yankton County.
No.
I think the minority was going to be in
Yeah.
Yankton County. But, you know, if we put that language in there, that's going to be requiring them to put down 25 million into an escrow account.
At the beginning.
Yeah, for 97 turbines, if, you know, Turner had the same language.
Yeah, you know, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And these are big corporations. They have a lot of financial backing, and they're perfectly capable of handling such a thing, because they're gonna, let's face it, they are, if they're being straight, they're gonna have to pay for it anyway.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I think of those, when we're looking at solar, is the solar farms have been a little bit more newer. Technology's evolving a little bit more rapidly there. Wind farms have been around for a longer time. So I think, you know, when these farms are going in, I think there is a bit more of a longer term commitment that they're making. And I think we do want to encourage that too.
Right.
One of the things that you're doing with that language is you are, to a certain extent, sorting out more legitimate companies from less legitimate companies, because if they didn't intend to pay for the decommissioning and just kind of sneak out, they're not gonna want to deal with Yankton County. But if they actually have a good business plan and know they have to decommission them,
Right.
they'll be perfectly fine with putting them on their side. Because they legitimately plan to take responsibility.
Well, that brings up another thought. Maybe we should have a section in there about when they put it up, how they're gonna transition the decommissioning when they sell it again 5 years later. What do we want done there? Did I blubber that up?
Nope, you said, I'm just looking back at cost financial.
Because
So we could,
how are we gonna know if Corporation XYZ in Philadelphia sells it to somebody in Florida? How are we gonna know that they're gonna continue to fund decommissioning?
They have to give us the money up front. That's why it says 50% of the estimated decommissioning cost will be placed into an escrow account held by the county at the beginning of the construction phase. So it's up front.
So that's 50%.
50% cash plus a 50% surety bond. And then every year after that, an additional, it says each year after the beginning of the construction phase, the applicant or its successor will contribute an additional 5% of the current cost estimate to the escrow account. So as the escrow account builds, that's cash, the surety bond decreases every year until after, what would that be, is it year 10?
10.
So I
Should be
think,
funded at
I think
10.
what you're telling me there is the county's gonna have to hire another person and pay a lot of expenses just to keep up on what you're talking about right there.
Not really, no, it's automatic.
Who's gonna check on it?
Well, they're gonna give us the money. We'll see the money come in.
You got it, but if they're for 5 years, then the next 5 years, what happens?
They give us 50% upfront,
Yep.
cash. We deposit that in an account.
Yep.
Every year after that, they give us another 5% in cash.
And who's gonna monitor that? The county will have to.
The county has to monitor that.
I would think the auditor would, but it's just like receiving taxes. It's the same thing. We have a process for receiving tax funds, for accounting for them, and for processing them into our system.
And they don't send it, then we hire an attorney to go get it. And yeah, I know the process.
Yeah.
It's gonna end up costing us money.
Well, I agree with you that we need to have something in here to make sure that we're covered for legal costs. That's not in there right now, as far as I know. There should, we do have a state's attorney, but they have other things on their plate. And so we should be reimbursed for any legal costs.
To Don's point, yeah, I mean, when you have turnover, people can certainly forget that's coming up 5 years from now, what that date was and things. And it is something that you definitely have to keep a close eye on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else in financial resources? That whole plan about 50% up front, and then essentially by year 10, it's 100% funded.
I guess I look at it as like, it's gonna be a 25 million, or, multi-million-dollar, escrow account starting right away.
Right.
That's a large sum of money to manage. It's not like something you really just wanna just throw into a single bank account or something.
Well,
So 25 million we put into an investment fund and get 8% on it. Do we get that 8%, or does the company
That would
get
that would stay within the escrow.
Stays within
stays
that?
in there and
Yeah.
funds the escrow.
And
That's
helps
only
fund the
fair.
escrow.
That's
And
only fair.
because the idea is that your
Yeah.
decommissioning costs are gonna go up, so hopefully that interest can
Yeah.
help cover it. So the worst case scenario, company goes bankrupt, you're left with a wind farm, the county still has the escrow account to cover the removal of that
Right.
structure.
Okay, and this was what Bruce required of solar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mike?
Oh, just a couple little things. Under D, is a small d.
Yep.
I would suggest put that annual, because that way it eliminates going through some bookkeeping every
Good
month.
point.
And it reduces the details.
Well, I would assume this will be in its own account.
Right.
So that money will never be mixed among the general funds. So to me, if it's either invested in treasuries or just a savings account or whatever, whenever that interest is
I'm
paid, it
just-
just goes to
Fine.
their,
I'm just-
yeah,
Maybe we should just
simplicity
take-
For bookkeeping that.
yeah.
you're talking about. And
because
the
it'll
other
have
way-
its own account.
yeah.
Right,
And-
maybe we should just take out the monthly, yearly, whatever it is, and because a lot of investments, they only credit, interest on an annual basis, or maybe they credit the interest on a semi-annual basis. It depends on the type of account that you're dealing with. So if we just take, on a
On-
monthly basis out of it,
Just take it out, yep.
Or at least annually, or something like that.
yeah,
Okay.
it simplifies.
Okay, we can omit that. Circle.
Sure, that would be a possible, at least, then at least you can do whatever you want with it.
Okay,
Quarterly would be a proper time, because I mean, your social security taxes are paid in quarterly by business owners, I mean, so
Right.
Is the
that's pretty common.
the 50-50 ratio the right ratio we should have, is that question. Because it is a large sum of money up front for a wind farm. And a wind farm is different from the solar farms, because the wind farm cost for decommissioning is much greater.
And I think we talked about, if I remember right, did we ponder a 20-year for the solar to do a certain portion up front and then space it out for by time year 20 rolled around that we had it 100% funded or 15 or something? So then you have less up front, because the chance of decommissioning a wind farm in year 5 is pretty low.
Yeah.
Because if you have a big storm come through, it's not your decommissioning fund that should handle it, it should be the insurance carried on the towers that do that. So, but for some reason, we ended up on 50% upfront, 10 years for the solar.
Yeah.
Even though solar panels probably last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
To me, this kind of comes back to the fact that the federal government is a very, very fickle business partner. And regardless of what they may have said in that Zoom meeting, I've reviewed the 10K annual Security and Exchange Commission financial reports of the corporation that owns Prevailing Wind and Beethoven. It's very, very thin. And I have seen numbers in that report that indicate to me that that company, that whole corporation, would not be profitable without production tax credits. And so if we have a change of administration and they suddenly decide, you know what, you guys are on your own, or they even terminate the thing, as they did with the Keystone Pipeline, we're gonna be standing here wishing that we had some cash in the bank when all these LLCs and corporations disappear. So that would be my rationale for wanting to have a large cash up front.
I like that.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing is, so if they have their 50% down, and then they pay the 5% until it's paid, but then we still would have in there that every 5 years they're going to reevaluate the cost, because it may not be covered in the 10 years if the costs have risen, right?
Right.
Okay,
Yep,
does that make sense?
yep.
No, though, you know, the system that we have is that it's, starts off day one 100% covered, just the ratio of escrow to bond.
Right.
And the idea was, back on the solar, was that bonds are less reliable over the long term. That, you know, they could stop paying on it or something and so forth. So the idea was to start with a bond to ease that upfront cost, and then, but work our way into 100% in escrow.
You're right, but again, in recent history, we've seen in the 2008 financial crisis where Lehman Brothers doesn't exist anymore. They're gone. And if you want to see just how shaky that industry is, read Andrew Sorkin's book, Too Big to Fail. They were actually funding their operations on overnight money, meaning that they had to go out into the marketplace and borrow money at 10 p.m. so that they could open the doors at 8 a.m. That's how thin those companies are. And when they went out the last night at 10 p.m. to borrow money, they got no bid. And at 8 a.m., they were out of business. And it's true in a mom and pop grocery store. It's also true in a major investment house. When you're out of cash, you're out of business. And that's what happened. So bonds are good, cash is better.
Can we move on?
Yes, please.
Good. Okay. So D is simply the notice to county. The applicant or its successor shall provide 6 months written notice to the zoning administrator that it intends to commence the decommissioning process. And then section E will be termination of use. So decommissioning of turbines must occur in the event the WEX is not in use for 6 consecutive months. At this time, the applicant or its successor and/or landowner will have 6 months to complete decommissioning in full accordance with the decommissioning plan. Okay, I think we do need to revisit that number. I'll go ahead and keep reading. Part B. If the applicant or its successor and/or landowner fail to decommission the WEX within 6 months following commencement of decommissioning, the county has the right, but not the obligation, to undertake decommissioning financed by the financial agreement required for a conditional use permit. And Mike has added some language here. If the applicant or its successor or the county incurs expenses in excess of the funds available for decommissioning, the county has the right to file a deficiency judgment against the land on which the WEX stands. This deficiency judgment will be treated as a tax lien against the land and the landowner at the time decommissioning is complete. This tax lien will become due and payable in the year the deficiency is incurred by the county. And the last point, the county is granted the right to seek injunctive relief in effect and complete decommissioning, as well as to seek reimbursement from the applicant or its successor or the landowner for decommissioning cost against any real estate owned by applicant or its successor or the landowner in which they have an interest, and to take all steps allowed by law to enforce said lien. Note, the landowner is ultimately responsible and could have a lien placed on their property should the applicant or its successor fail to fully remunerate the cost of decommissioning. So, the 6 months to complete decommissioning, depending on how many turbines are there, say there's 40, say we do the 40, say there's 40 turbines, I'm not sure 6 months is a realistic time frame to take those turbines down. Solar panels, maybe. I mean, because they're all low to the ground. You don't need a big crane around and all of that.
Material.
And you don't have 15 feet of concrete to dig out and things like that, and the numerous power lines that come from these versus a solar in one location.
Now, it is 6 months to commence, so.
Well, there's 2 in
Yeah.
here. So, decommissioning must occur in the event is not in use. At this time, the applicant will have 6 months to complete decommissioning in full accordance.
Yeah, that's
So it's
too
not
short.
6 months
Yeah.
to start, it's 6 months to complete. And so I
Yeah.
think we need to revisit that 6 months.
Do we have any examples of decommissioning that we could go out and find?
I don't.
I don't either,
I'm sure we could try and find some.
but that's too short a time. I don't see how you could do it in 6 months.
In my opinion, it needs to be at least a year, minimum.
Mhm. I think you need to have something of the order of, it has to be started, commenced within a certain amount of time, and then I think something like minimum of a year to get it done. 6 months to get it done is way too tight.
One measure we might use is how long does it take to build one? It probably, I would think decommissioning would be some percentage of the amount of time it takes to build a wind farm. It wouldn't be the entire time, because obviously you're being more careful when you're putting it up than you would be taking it down. But it would be maybe half that or 2/3 or something like that.
So how about if, because we got 5 minutes, How about if I look into, or Gary maybe, to look at, to see how long it takes? Just an estimate in there, because 6 months is just not realistic.
I'll look at that, I'll see.
Thank you. So anything else big in item E right now, as we look to kind of close this discussion up a little bit?
I want to
Yes.
go back to abandoned turbines for just a second.
Okay,
Is there any way we can get some legal language in there, that the collateral, if all the other things break down, if the farmer breaks down, he won't take it down, if the company won't take it down, we have to do it, that we can file a lien against any one of those, I think it says in here.
Yep.
But we also need to have that collateral of being able to sell that steel and turbine. Cause somebody's gonna want it, and it's gonna be worth some money,
okay.
and the two parties that aren't gonna be able to afford to do it, more than likely.
Yeah, we could probably find language, like when we foreclose on property for a tax lien, because any buildings that are on it can be, could be sold. There might be language in already in the county where we have how we deal with property that we've foreclosed on for taxes.
Okay. I'll make a note of that. Gene, did you have something?
Yeah, that last line under C, subpoint C, note the landowner is ultimately responsible and could have a lien placed on their property should the applicant or its successor fail to fully remunerate the cost of decommissioning.
Yeah.
And that's the landowner that's basically originally in a contract with the large wind energy system, and if the developer of the wind energy system fails to follow through on their obligation, the other part of the contract, the farmer becomes responsible. That doesn't sound logically fair, does it?
Well, he's gotta sue the other.
So,
Oh, I'm not an attorney, but it just doesn't sound right, does it?
yeah, but, take in mind,
$1,000.
the county already in theory, the county already has the money to take it down and remove it. And this is the case of, if it happens that that the money isn't big enough to take it all down, so it's the excess beyond that, so. If, we don't want the county to be on the hook of, if our decommissioning costs were
I don't see the counties
underestimated.
ever being able to afford to go out and take those things down, ever. We can't even build a half a mile of road
Well,
anymore.
we're saying that we're using the escrow account to.
It ain't gonna cover it.
Yeah, and we're gonna say that it's not enough to cover it, so it's the excess beyond that.
Yes.
That's what the landowners are gonna be, that's what could possibly be put as a lien on the landowners, is the excess beyond that, not the whole decommissioning cost.
But the landowner already has the loss of damage to the property, so why would a lien be placed on the farmer for something that they've already incurred the wrath of?
That's the 15,000 a year.
Right, the idea is.
They're making a big decision on
Yeah,
it.
and that's,
Yeah.
it's just like, if a landowner left a derelict building that's in violation of code, we put a zoning violation on it, and it's their responsibility to fix it. If the county goes out and has to fix it, well, the landowner's responsible for that bill,
Right.
That I understand,
so.
if that's what this means.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate idea, but we are trying to prevent that from happening in a very ugly way by having this escrow account, so that the county has at least money there to do it, most of it, and if it doesn't cover it all, well.
And encouraging farmers to get involved.
And it encourages the landowner to really read
Say
the
again, sir?
contracts.
Why does the farmer, why should he have a responsibility on that burden? I mean, it's the solar company and, basically are the ones that are profiting from the whole thing. Why is the
It's the
farmer-
$15,000 a year. He agreed to do it. They gotta think about it before they sign up.
Yeah,
If you do leave it that way, there are companies that will
keep in mind, this is a last resort, and we've done everything we can to ensure that the county will have sufficient funds to decommission in cash.
Yeah, we,
Now, the landowner who is the lessor will receive cash payments, rent. So they're exercising their authority to lease their land and receive cash payments in rent. It's only right, as a last resource, that the person who exercised their authority will also have the responsibility in the end, as a last resort. It can't be the county. And frankly, this language is a warning. It's to make it clear to the landowners, when they sign that contract, that they could ultimately be responsible for part of the cost of removal. It's only fair to the landowners to let them know that in clear language.
Okay, so next week, Friday is Good Friday, and Thursday's Holy Thursday. Do we want to meet Thursday next week, or do we want to skip a week?
I'd be open to skipping a week. I'll actually be out of town, so.
Okay, I had a feeling some people would maybe be busy. That's okay? It's okay to skip next week? All right, so then we would meet the week after, which will be April. Something like that, April 3rd? 4th?
4th.
April 4th. So that would be our next meeting at 4 o'clock. So we'll continue this decommissioning, and then we've got a couple other little things. We had flicker analysis, things like that we wanted to put in. So I did put some of that language in there that we can review. Not saying we have to use it, it's just a starting place, so keep that in mind. So at this
We
point,
got those distances too, don't we? Aren't we gonna look at the setbacks?
yes,
Okay.
and that, we'll revisit that as well, Don. So, and definitions, and so there's lots of little things that we need to tidy up. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.
There's